Welcome to the latest episode of the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. My name is Hunter Baumgardt, your host. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBeOnAir. Feel free to like the Facebook page as well, which is Hunter Baumgardt Sports. You can get all the updates on the podcast there. And of course, you can watch or you can listen to the podcast. Whatever is most convenient for you, you can watch on YouTube or listen on SoundCloud. Simply search Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. Today, really fun guest. I'm excited for this. Steve Sparky Fifer from the Wendy's Big Show at 12:50 a.m. The Fan in Milwaukee. He is going to join me, and you can follow him on Twitter at Sparky Radio. We're going to get into his career, how he got to the Fan in Milwaukee. He is the assistant program director there. So I'm going to ask him, being one of the higher ups of the station, what was it like when sports stopped in March? What was it like to have to put programming on every day, knowing that sports weren't going on? I'm really curious to hear his answer about that. Also, we're going to get into some Packers talk, of course. Can the defense be reliable in the postseason? And what's going on with Giannis? Is he going to sign? When is he going to sign? What's he hearing? All that coming up right now with Steve Sparky Fifer on the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. Joining me this week on the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast is Steve Sparky Fifer from 12:50 a.m. The Fan in Milwaukee. You can follow him on Twitter at Sparky Radio. You can hear him 2 to 6 each weekday on the Wendy's Big Show there on The Fan. And Steve, really appreciate the time and excited to talk about some of your career and then some Wisconsin sports topics today.
Absolutely. Let's get to it.
Absolutely. So I just want to ask kind of how has this year been for you? Obviously, you know, many of the industries have been hit hard by the pandemic, including radio. But of course, when sports is your main thing on the station and you being one of the higher ups at the station, when sports stops in March, what was kind of your mindset knowing you still had to put like 13 hours of local programming on each day?
Holy crap. That was the mindset that I had was, holy crap, now what are we going to do? You're right. I mean, and the biggest thing, you know, about all of this really, and the tough part is, you know, when you do sports talk radio, you have to remember that people are coming to you to have the escape, right? You're their entertainment, you're their movie, you're their book that they read or whatever the case may be. They don't want to hear about everything else going on in the world. And I think sometimes some guys get trapped into thinking, well, you know, we got to talk about, you know, politics and something that somebody said, or we got to go into COVID and all the numbers. Obviously, with the COVID numbers, yes, you address it, right? If there's news that something is being shut down, restaurants are being shut down and stuff, obviously we read that news on the air, react to it, we move forward. But that was probably the most difficult thing was, you know, making sure everybody was kind of staying on course and not going too overboard per se on stuff like that, and you know, trying to figure out things to talk about. Look, sports talk radio is talking about sports, obviously, but also to a certain degree, it's kind of dude radio too, right? I mean, you're talking about your favorite movies you had when you're watching as a kid, or what golf courses do you like to play at, or whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of different things other than sports you can come up with during that time, and that really was the area where you really had to focus on. And for us in Milwaukee, it was all about the NBA and the Bucks, and this bubble was going to happen. Was it not going to happen? Were they going to be able to finally win a championship, or was it going to get canceled because of COVID? Just Bucks fans' luck. That's how this is going to work. You know, so it was, I guess we were kind of really more NBA focused than anything, because that was the kind of like the closest thing to us that we were focused on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Has it been kind of, you know, and then basketball comes back, baseball comes back, football's going on, and now it's, you know, kind of full bore. Was it kind of overload at first? Were you just super relieved to get all that sports back?
I would say super relieved. Yeah. We'll deal with all the information as we can. You know, you know, like when we had the Brewers going, obviously you could kind of tell right away that, okay, this team probably isn't going to win a World Series or so forth. So you kind of just start to prioritize. The Bucks were still that team, you know, until they got beat by Miami. That was it. And even after they got beat by Miami, it was still the hot item for the next 2, 3, 4 days after that, because people were so mad about how the whole thing played out. And then after that, Packers are king. I mean, that's just how it normally is. You know, on a normal year, in Milwaukee and probably around the state of Wisconsin, Packers are king. So, you know, the Bucks start in October, November. Yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit, but it's mainly going to be Green Bay Packers through and through until the season's over. And then you switch over to be, you know, getting more heavily into the NBA and so forth, and a little college sports sprinkled in. But for the most part, it's Packer heavy during this time of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to hear a little bit about what got you to Milwaukee as far as your path. Everybody's path is different in the sports radio world. What got you to the Wendy's Big Show in Milwaukee, and was hosting a show in Milwaukee always your career goal?
Uh, Hosting my own show was a career goal. I think
Mm.
hosting a national show was also a career goal at some point. I'm
Mhm.
long past that. I don't really care about the national aspect anymore. But I'd say pretty much this is pretty much what I dreamed of what I'm doing right now. You know, for me, the next thing is to be able to run my own radio station, a sports talk station at some point, assistant program director here for the last 100 years. So, you know, at some point, I'd like to run my own station. We'll see how that all plays out. You know, for me, it was probably different than a lot of people. In eighth grade, I knew this is what I wanted to do. So from eighth grade on, I kind of just focused in on what I wanted to do. So I started lecturing at my church where we would go for church. So I would start reading in front of hundreds and hundreds of people, reading on Christmas and Christmas Eve masses and stuff,
Mm.
practicing public speaking and getting used to that, reading every like baseball digest and football digest and sporting news and all these other things I could get my hands on since of my house, reading all of that stuff and really becoming submersed into all of that. And really back then, you know, there really wasn't sports talk in Milwaukee. There was, but you really couldn't hear the station down in Kenosha where I grew up.
Mm.
So for me, it was, you know, haggling with my radio dial, trying to pick up the score in Chicago. And they were on a horrible frequency too when they first got going. So, and then WMVP was going there for a second, the first time around on AM 1000. So going back and forth between those two, listening to them all the time and kind of getting a feel of what sports talk radio was and knowing that's what I wanted to do. Cause look, man, I'm 5'6", like a $145. I'm not playing pro sports. Like that's not happening. I knew that in eighth grade that I was just like the smallest kid in my class. Like this is not going to go happen. So I better figure out something else to do if I'm going to do sports. And that's kind of it. So from that moment on, I kind of dedicated myself to trying to get to this point. And then I ended up going to prom with a girl who ended up being Tim Allen, his little sister. Tim Allen, of course, does our post-game shows after Brewer
Oh.
games here on Fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I met Tim that night. He offered me an internship because that was my senior year, that June or whatever it was. And then I never called him after that. And then he called me and said, dude, do you want this internship or not? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, when can you start? I'm like, well, I'm not doing anything right now. He's like, good, then drive over here. And I lived like 10 or 15 minutes away from 95 Wheel Rock and WLIP down in Kenosha. So I started interning for him then, started going to cover Brewer games with him and him and Greg Vaughn going back and forth about the Niners and the Cowboys because Tim's a Cowboys fan, Vaughn's a Niners fan, and getting to be a part of that. And then I eventually started producing his AM weekend sports talk show on Saturday mornings with John Weiser. Weiser now does Thursday Night Lights locally in Milwaukee in My 24, play-by-play guy. And then also does Carthage men's basketball and football play-by-play as well. Back then, it was us three doing the show. And then eventually, after working there for a couple of years, they got sold, essentially eliminated all the sports programming for the most part. And then I ended up going to WLKG Radio in Lake Geneva, where I produced and kind of was a character figure on the Sharkman in the Morning TV show or radio show there with Terry Ledford, who now is a sports talk show host out in Baltimore. So I was there for a while and then got fired from there because they didn't want to pay me what they were paying me just to produce a morning show in Lake Geneva. So I left there and then was out of radio for a year working in a plastics factory. I had an absolute blast. I mean, it was one of the funnest times ever, but had a blast, did a lot of stuff while I was at the factory and so forth. And then thanks to Tim Allen, again, who, you know, one of my better friends to this day, he set up going to breakfast with a guy named Dobie Maxwell, who is a comic in the Midwest area, who at that point was Tim's morning guy on the country station that Tim Allen was the program director of at that point. Dobie was friends with Drew Olson, who of course now is on ESPN. No, he's not. Where is he now? Where is Drew Olson now? He's on The Game in Milwaukee.
Yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right. Game in Milwaukee. He was on ESPN Radio, but at that time he was Brewers beat writer for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and so forth. So we went out and had breakfast, so forth. And Tim was explaining to him that it's a crying shame I'm not in radio. I should be, and blah 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 blah. And next thing you know, they're like, well, Steve the Homer True is looking for somebody, producer, whatever. He goes through them like water. I was like, oh, all right, yeah, sure. I've been on the radio for a while. I'm in Kenosha, Lake G. I'm not sure that's good enough to get me to Milwaukee, but okay, fine. And I got fortunate, man, because Drew made a call on my behalf. W. Maxwell made a call on my behalf. I got the interview with Homer. They eventually hired me. I was a producer for Homer for 6.5 years. I eventually ended up becoming a on-air host, fill in for Homer whenever he was off. I had my own weekend show, eventually 2 on Sunday nights that they let me start doing. And then in December of 2004, I gave my notice and left there to come help start this radio station in January of 2005. And at that point, I was the producer for the Peter Brown Show, our first afternoon show here on the Fan. That lasted all of 4 or 5 months, and then they had fired the morning show, so I ended up well, they didn't fire all of the morning show. They fired part of the morning show, the one co-host they fired. So I ended up going on the morning show with Chuck Garbedian and doing mornings, and have been here ever since.
Sure. What was it like? And then we'll get into some sports topics. But what was it like starting a sports radio station like in Milwaukee? Like, what is that? What was that like? What is that process kind of like?
It was really tough for us. You know, the other FM sticks here in town that are our competitors now that weren't around before, they transitioned from a music format and then what we call stunting, right? Just stalling, playing stuff on the air. Everybody's tuning in to seeing what you're flipping to. You had that huge audience waiting for you. Well, when we started our station on 1250, we had a religious format we were flipping from. So we had crickets listening to us when we flipped. I mean, we had the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel that promoted the fact that we had flipped, Bob Wolfley and all of that, and still grateful Bob Wolfley for helping us with all that. But for the most part, no, that was it. I mean, it was us, and it was 1510 at that moment in time, and everybody thought we were crazy. I remember when I left WISN, they're like, you'll be lucky if that thing survives 2 or 3 years. Like, there's no way we're going to have 2 sports talk stations in Milwaukee. 1510 doesn't get any ratings. How are you all going to get any ratings? And for the first couple of years, we didn't get any ratings. And then we eventually started to turn the corner, in large part thanks to post-game shows. Obviously, Tim Allen doing that Brewers post-game show. I was doing Bucks post. I was doing Packer post with Gary Ellerson as well. But one of the big turning moments for our station was when Bill Michaels arrived from TMJ. He showed up here. We started the statewide network. That's kind of when we kind of took it to a different level. And then when we eventually went to 105.7, which we no longer have, but when we went to the FM translator, because it's not a true stick necessarily, 6 years ago, that gave us another boost as well. So that's kind of the story of how the whole thing played out.
Sure. Yeah. Steve Sparky Fifer joining me on the Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Sparky Radio. And of course, hear him on the Wendy's Big Show each weekday, 2 to 6 on the Fan in Milwaukee. Kind of transitioning to sports, I do want to, you interviewed David Stearns last week on the program. And I am curious, when you go into an interview like that, where you're trying to, think of topics or think of questions to ask a guy like David Stearns, where they're not, going to give away all the secrets to the kingdom, so to speak. Yep. How do you go about, asking those, asking questions that you think will get something out of them and not just the constant cliche answers that we hear from maybe like coaches and GMs and things like that? How do you go about that?
I think you just got to, first of all, the biggest thing is that person has to be comfortable with you. If it's a one-off, like the first time we interviewed David Stearns, versus now, completely different. And it got to the point interviewing David Stearns, I would just make fun of him on the radio. I'm like, oh, come on, man. That's another cookie cutter cliche answer or whatever else. Man, do they teach you guys this stuff or whatever? Yeah. And over the course of time, it's loosened up. And now David, I think, is really comfortable with us. We're really comfortable with him. We can have fun, and I think part of the reason why that really developed the way it is because he started coming out to our toy drive every year and kind of got to know Gary and Leroy and myself and having conversations off the air as well as on the air and so forth. So now when he comes on, he knows what he's going to get. He knows what he's going to get from me. He has an idea of what is coming from Gary. Nobody really knows with Leroy what happens there. But I mean, for the most part, I'm joking. I love Leroy. But I mean, that's kind of what it is. If you're doing a one-off interview, right? So let's say you get one opportunity to interview Matt LaFleur in lacrosse, and darn right well you're probably never going to get another opportunity. then you really got to get creative as far as how are you going to get different things out of him, or how are you going to build a quick relationship early in the interview to get him to loosen up and laugh a little bit. Whether that's, figuring out something, from earlier in his career. I was reading about this the other day. I was always interested, like, how did this whole thing play out or whatever? And then you lay out the scenario, maybe you get him to laugh, loosen up a little bit. Because in any interview, the goal is to have the person on the other end of the phone feel like it's not an interview. Feel like we're just having a conversation on the phone and that nobody else is listening. David Bakhtiari is another guy that we have on Tuesdays on our afternoon show in Milwaukee. And that's another one. I mean, from when he started with us to where he is now, I mean, it totally feels, to me at least, like a conversation you're just having with your guys in the living room, just having a conversation. And that is the ultimate goal. And that's what makes a guy like Pat McAfee so good, what he does. And he's a stand-up comedian. Very talented stand-up comedian. He's filled stadiums and everything else. So getting into this, it's not as easy as he makes it look. But that's the one thing that stands out for him. Everybody that comes out to him immediately becomes relaxed. They know he's not going to go at them. They know he's going to have fun with them. There's be hooting and hollering and carrying on and all that. And that, I think, is really what makes that show so good.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and that's been the case with Aaron Rodgers. These Tuesday interviews with Aaron Rodgers have been like no other Aaron Rodgers interview we've seen in his whole career. The amount of things that he's able to get out of Aaron Rodgers, and like you said, they're just so relaxed, and it just seems like you're watching a 40-minute conversation every Tuesday. And like you said, that's the goal. Speaking of the Packers, I want to get into a couple of quick Packers questions before I let you go. Looking at this team, they've kind of been beating up on some bad teams this year: Falcons, Lions, Bears, Jaguars, Texans, 49ers even. And then they lost to the Buccaneers, the Colts, and then their signature wins over the Saints. Do you fear that we are getting, some false confidence here with this team? Do you think they can make a run in the playoffs, even though we might be having some false confidence?
Listen, every team has false confidence right now. Because there's nobody really that good, especially not in the NFC. I mean, the Seahawks, Russell Wilson is self-destructing. He's not anywhere close to what he was at the beginning of the year. He's throwing interceptions. So, in their defense is their defense. So, you don't really get too concerned about the Seattle Seahawks at this point. The New Orleans Saints are without Drew Brees. I'm not scared of Taysom Hill or Winston at this point, Jameis Winston. So, that doesn't concern me. Tampa Bay, that might be the one team that concerns me a little bit just because of how physically they dominated us up front on both sides of the ball the last time we saw Tampa Bay. Now, will that play out again this time? I don't know. But if there was one team that I look at and go, okay, that's a little bit concerning, it may be Tampa Bay. San Francisco, they're starting to get healthy, start going in the right direction. But again, how sold are you on the quarterback in San Francisco as far as beating you? And the ability to stop the run for the Green Bay Packers, obviously, be another thing. But they've lost a lot of their offensive line. They lost a lot of what made them so good from a couple of years ago. So that's not the same line that we've seen in the past. So I guess what I've been saying on the radio, and I'll continue to say, is the Packers have just as good a shot at going to the Super Bowl as anybody else does that'll be in the NFC playoffs.
And then looking at the defensive side, we heard some of the defensive players went to Mike Pettin and said, can we simplify things this past week? And it seemed to, they got 7 sacks on Hurts and Wentz on Sunday against the Eagles. Do you think this defense can improve enough, maybe because of that change, to be somewhat reliable or just reliable in the postseason?
7 sacks mean absolutely nothing to me. Like, absolutely nothing. There was a stat out today that Carson Wentz, I think, has been sacked 64 times or something like that. Yeah. And nobody's been sacked more outside of Carr for the Texans in his first couple of years with the Texans back in the day when he's getting annihilated by his offensive line, David Carr. So, look, the offensive line's horrible, right? Jalen Hurts got sacked 3 times in the little time that he was in there. So, from that standpoint, I'm not really buying that. Do they want it simplified? Sure. This is the same stuff I heard from players with Dom Capers. Can we simplify it? It's too complicated. That type of stuff, that has to be communicated, in my opinion, earlier. Like, if there was an issue here, then this should have been talked about in week 4. Why are we waiting to week 12 to have the conversation? Week 13, oh, now it's too complicated. Why didn't somebody say something in week 4, week 5? Why did we wait this long? So we'll see if this plays out. I'm not sold that this all of a sudden is fixed. Now all of a sudden they're going to get all this pass rush because of this conversation. Philly's not a proving ground for me. Detroit isn't going to be a proving ground for me, right? If we get to get going on Tannehill in Tennessee and are able to stop Derrick Henry or slow Derrick Henry down, then you'll win me over if you're able to do that.
That makes sense. And final question: I know you hosted, or have hosted the Bucks post-game show for a long time on the Fan there in Milwaukee. Giannis is on everybody's mind right now. Do you think there's a reason he's waiting to sign this deal? Do you think he'll sign it before the season? What's your thought on Giannis right now?
We talked about this yesterday. My patience has run pretty thin with this whole situation here. I mean, this is the guy that, I'm going to hang, championship banners. I want my jersey retired and all of this stuff. You've known for the last year that this moment was coming. For the last year. Every other year, you've, by all accounts, told everybody, even if they didn't ask you, that you love Milwaukee and wanted to stay here. Then before the year starts, I don't want to talk about my contract anymore. I don't want to talk about it during the season. We're done talking about it. That was one red flag. I was like, well, why now? Now is the time when you should tell everybody, I'm signing the Supermax this offseason. Don't worry about me. I'm staying. Didn't do it. Now comes time. Okay, now here's your time. Are you going to sign or aren't you going to sign? So now it opens up. Well, he's in Greece. So then I get from listeners on Twitter, well, he's in Greece, Sparky. Like, he'll do it when he comes back. Like, don't worry about it. Well, first of all, as far as I know, you can still have a cell phone in Greece. You can still get email in Greece. And I'm guessing there might be fax machines in Greece. This deal could have been done while he was in Greece if he wanted it to be done. So fine. So we went. So now he comes back. And it's a Sunday. Okay. This was last week. All right. Well, he's back. Now he'll sign. And we're at Wednesday. And we're at Thursday. Still nothing. Then it's, he's going to sign on his birthday. That's what this is all about. He wants to sign on his birthday. Okay, it's his birthday, fine. At that point, I got angry because I'm like, if you need that much attention to do it on your birthday, like, this is ridiculous. Okay, so Sunday comes, and I'm waiting. Nothing. Now here comes media availability for Monday. No Giannis. Media availability on Tuesday, there was none. So to me, there's only one of a couple things going on. Either A, they are haggling on years, which means the Bucks want 5 years, and maybe Giannis's agent wants 2 and an option for a third or something like that. We'll extend for a couple of years to see if you can get this done, but we're not going long-term on this deal. We want Giannis to be able to hit it big again and the ability to go somewhere else if this doesn't work out over the next 2 or 3 years. That has to be what it is. I don't know what else it could possibly be other than he's not going to sign it. And him and his team are trying to figure out PR-wise how they're going to be able to sidestep what's about to happen because people are going to be mad, I would assume. Now, there are some that say, well, even if he does it, that's fine. Don't trade him. Go through the season and then see what happens in the offseason. I'm telling you right now, if they don't sign him to an extension, they will not win an NBA championship this year. The amount of distraction that will come with this all year, Bucks fans, it will be agonizing this year because ESPN, Fox Sports, CBS, all of them will be talking about this nonstop. Players around the league will be asked about it. They'll be talking about it. Every time Giannis does a presser with anybody on the road outside of Milwaukee, it will come up. He will have to answer the questions. When he does national interviews on TV, on TNT or whatever, that will come up. You'll hear Barkley and Shaq give their opinions a million times during the course of a season. Like, I'm just absolutely dreading all of that. And if I'm dreading it, just imagine. I mean, Middleton, he's already been asked, he's had 2 media sessions, both times asked about Giannis. And this is going to go on all year long, not only with Giannis, but players in his locker room too. They're going to get asked on the road about Giannis. It's going to become a huge distraction and one that they really cannot afford. On top of that, you traded away these draft picks for Drew Holiday. And I love Drew Holiday. Like, that was the guy I wanted them to get. Not at that price, but that was the guy I wanted. So I was happy they got him. I understand why they did it, because you got to keep Giannis at all costs. Fine. But now think about this. If he doesn't sign and he walks away, Drew Holiday is a player option. Drew Holiday can be like, well, if he ain't coming back, I'm out. Okay, so now you don't have a point guard. You don't have your back-to-back MVP. And now your team is centered around Chris Middleton. We're going to go right back to where we were. I mean, and it's going to be bad for a while because you're not going to sign superstars to come play with Chris Middleton. That's not happening. So you're going to have to try and move Middleton probably. You're going to have to try and move Brook Lopez as soon as possible. Try to recruit some of those picks. Then on top of all of that, if you do stink in 2025, the Pelicans own your pick. You win the lottery, it's their pick. 2027, you win the lottery, it's their pick. Oh, yeah. Then there's 2 years where they can swap with you. If you win the lottery, it's their pick. If you win the lottery, it's their pick. I mean, you completely screw yourself if this doesn't work out with Giannis. That's really what happened. And then the Bogdan situation really messed all this up even more. So, yeah, they have a mess on their hands is what they have. And as confident as they were talking all year in that front office about, oh, yeah, he's going to sign, he's going to sign, he's going to sign. If you think we're sweating, I have to think they're sweating even more.
And every day that goes by, it makes it even worse and more nerve-wracking for those guys, and obviously for us too as Bucks fans. Steve, really appreciate the time. Really fun to talk to you. A lot of great points about the Bucks, and then of course learning about your career was really interesting as well. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
That is Steve Sparky Fifer. You can follow him on Twitter at Sparky Radio and hear him on 1250 AM The Fan each weekday from 2 to 6. He is the host of the Wendy's Big Show along with Gary Ellerson and Leroy Butler, 2 former Packers. It's a great show. Highly suggested. If you're not in the Milwaukee area, simply download the radio.com app and you can listen to it there each weekday, 2 to 6. And they have great guests. Like you mentioned, they have David Bakhtiari each Tuesday at 4:35. And they've got a bunch of different guests through each week. And of course, some great insight from Steve Sparky Fifer and Gary Ellerson and Leroy Butler being 2 former Packers and Gary Ellerson playing for the Badgers as well. So it's a great show, highly suggested. And thanks again to Steve for hopping on the podcast this week. Really interesting, especially those last points about Giannis. I mean, taking us through the timeline there and thinking how distracted this team is going to be. To really no fault of anybody but Giannis, really, and the front office. All the other players are going to have to be distracted by this. And like he said, very low probability they win a championship with all those distractions. We saw it. They had many distractions in the bubble and weren't able to win a championship. I think part of that was because of the distractions. Could this play a role with COVID going on and you have the Giannis extension looming over everybody's heads? I think that could play a role in how successful this season could be for the Bucks. So we shall see. But great points from Steve there on those. And of course, his radio name is Sparky. That's why we call him Steve Sparky Fifer. Hope you enjoyed that interview. I really enjoyed getting to know, especially his early career. Really interesting how his prom date turned into his, his first step in his radio career. That was really a neat story. And then his road starting being one of the founders of the Fan in Milwaukee. Really appreciate Steve's time, and I will talk to you again next week. My name is Hunter Baumgardt. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBOnAir. You can feel free to like the Facebook page as well, Hunter Baumgardt Sports, to get updates on the podcast, and you can watch or listen to the podcast. You can watch on YouTube or listen on SoundCloud. Simply search Hunter Baumgardt Sports Podcast. Feel free to subscribe as well. Have a great rest of your week. Packers play the Lions coming up on Sunday. Should be another victory. We shall see. Maybe Giannis will have signed by the next time I talk to you. And the Brewers seem to be interested in Jock Peterson, free agent outfielder, formerly of the Dodgers. So maybe they'll make a move before the next time around, even with the virtual winter meetings underway as well. So talk to you next week. And as always, stay positive.